it's a great pleasure to be here. Gini and I have been very long time friends. Flora I know through her work, but it's the first time we actually meet in person. And it's a great honor to be invited to sort of like be sort of the interrogator. But I think it is very interesting because the work is, it's called sort of like transfiguration, so it has to do with the transforming of the figure. And I think it's important because it is not always that easy accessible how their worlds have worked to get them to talk a bit more about the work. Now Gini has sort of like one of the pages, this one, had the title Thin Time, which I never heard and I really liked the sound of it. And she explains that thin time sort of refers to the veil between words, between the worlds, and during a time like Halloween, sort of like when there's a change of season and between the death. And I want Gini to sort of tell a bit more about her fascination with, in the images, death, and then the celebration of life in dance.
So, my work is along there, mostly paintings, and Flora's work is prints and drawings along there. So I'm also a DJ, so I watch people dance a lot. I like dancing, and I'm very aware that we're in a rather critical time in history at the moment. In fact, my 4 Horses of the Apocalypse, I did them at the beginning of the Ukraine war and Gaza. I was kind of like really freaked out about it, so that's my response. And basically things have got even worse. But however, if I had a celebration, I think I'd call it dancing on the edge of the abyss, because in my experience, my parents fought in the Second World War, and the stories I heard when I was a child was all about parties. Because, if people are in danger of their lives, they think their lives are going to end any minute, they party. It's sex and dance and joy. And as a DJ, I feel that dancing is really important for the spirit and the soul of people. So this one is based on Dance Macabre, which is a well-known motif since medieval times. So these dances are led by a skeleton, who knows where. These ones, that's the thin time, and Halloween in Celtic law is called Samhain, is that the way to pronounce it? Anyway, the idea is that the veil is between the worlds is very thin that time of year because it's the shift from light to dark. And so these, spirit, people are very prone to contacting the dead at that time, but also spirits from the other side can go through. So it's a kind of magical time, really. So that's all about that. And I've got various casts of characters in my head that I've made prints of. They're all coming together there and having a good dance. And this one is it's a procession led by Dionysus, who's the god of not only wine but dance, joy, but also chaos, ecstasy. Very double-edged character. And I call it the Califumpians because I looked up different words for procession. And I found this wonderful word, califump, which means a riotous procession. So anyway, that's the Califumpians. This one is again based on an old theme, which is a kind of offshoot of Dance Macabre, Death and the Maiden. Normally the maiden is sort of like swooning and kind of like a victim. But I wanted to portray the maiden as being very much in control and end up stomping on the skeleton. You can understand the patriarchy or negativity or whatever you like. Anyway, I'll shut up for a bit.
Because you really covered all my questions.
Oh, sorry.
I have to recalibrate it. So it's sort of like, because Flora's work also has sort of like, to me as an observer, sort of like to do with that same veil, the sort of like shifting between worlds. But your world seemed to be more the inner world, the world in nature, and the intuitive one in your work. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I think, the transfiguration has to do certainly with crossing between worlds, but it is the world of the imagination. So I think it takes in a lot of myth and story, but often they are quite sort of washed and tumbled together, and often the story will emerge as I am making the image. So it's a kind of question of stirring the materials on the plate and just responding to what appears. So I think it's very much about worlds that I've entered while reading or dreaming, or just all my life experience really comes up and finds echoes in folk tale and in real life. So it's all a kind of tangle. So often I won't know what my work is about until afterwards.
But are they referring to, because the little bit I know about Wales, there's a lot of old kind of folklore, legend, stories going on. There's a kind of like double world going on a bit, like I feel in Ireland or Cornwall, much less in London. And so it's sort of like, are the sort of stories of the Welsh kind of olden times and the olden glories, do they sort of play a part in your imagery?
They do, but in quite a subtle way. I suppose I'm anxious not to claim a lot of Welsh myths on my own, because I have only lived in Wales for 12 years. So I think they're just beginning to bubble up into it. I think because I grew up reading Andrew Lang's various fairy books, the yellow fairy book, blue fairy book, they're massive great tomes of fairy tales, and I just absorbed these all and read them repeatedly. I think it's quite hard to say what has gone where, but certainly the Welsh idea of Anu, the underworld, or a sort of other world, is, I feel a really strong resonance with that idea. With the idea of, I suppose it links up with fairy lands and a crossing place between reality and the land of the imagination, or a strange land where everything is turned upside down. That idea of a transformed world which can live inside us and is perhaps different for everyone is what I try to get across in my work. So I think that's also where I don't like to define too much what they're about. I like the images themselves to be a kind of crossing place. So I think many people enter them in different ways.
So on the what you just say, the remark, the kind of turning the world upside down. So I would like to come back on Gini to that, because also you have, although saying I want to go back to the dance motif in your work, I know you're a DJ, although to my shame and regret I never heard you play, because I'm not a party person, so I'm really, that is the boring part of my friendship. But although I do like dancing. Anyway, but sort of to come back on that, so the kind of turning the world upside down, when things get either that the reality gets too harsh, or so that there seems to be a theme that you both work on, but in different kind of ways. So can you sort of like say a little bit more, because it's not just, you're not a DJ just because there's nothing else to do, and this has, it must refer also, say, to the primitive kind of beat, to the kind of absorption into music, etc. Can you say a little bit more how it sort of like mirrors or echoes into your work, please?
Okay, well, there's another way of looking at the world turned upside down, because I'm very keen on carnivals and parties.
Right.
And I don't know, probably lots of you used to come to Lanny Fancy Dress years ago, which was a wonderful event in Lanny. Sadly ended about 10 or 12 years ago, but the whole town dressed up. It went on for about 40 or 50 years, but then it all got too much and it stopped. But anyway, some of my images directly from that, people dressing up. But traditionally, Carnival was a time when the world was turned upside down, literally, socially, because the servants became the masters and, the Lord of Misrule reigned. So that's a kind of more sociological way of looking at it, if you like. But I've actually had a solo exhibition called The World Turned Upside Down, so I like that image a lot.
And another kind of aspect which I was sort of questioning, because you're both more or less of the same, now we are of the same kind of age, in that we sort of from the 60s, where...
Who was actually quite a lot young.
I said you and I know, I couldn't dare. Some people can see the difference. No, I meant sort of like in continuation of what you just said. That say the kind of like in the 60s it was very much from because the H bomb at that time was sort of like hanging over us, and that so everybody went inside themselves either to find who they were or sort of like really get stoned and dance till there was no tomorrow. And I think just that sort of an aspect of your life have sort of also plays part in your imagination, your images now.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to Flora in this different kind of
I
stuff.
haven't really thought of it like that, but it's part of who I am.
Yeah.
So yes, I'd say you're right there, yeah.
Because sort of like when I with Flora, a lot of them seem to be as if they're quite mysterious. They're sort of undefined, and yet they seem to be the figures be very clear that they sort of understand their own worlds. I mean, that really, so this kind of language is sort of like, is it a communication that we have to look at the images more in order to understand our inner worlds? Is that because making images is communication, isn't it, in some kind of way, even if you don't know how you have arrived at the image?
Oh, completely, yes. I think the image I would use would be from a scene from The Voyage of the Dawn Treader by C.S. Lewis. Yes, in which they are sucked into a picture, so they find on the edge of this picture frame, and there's a boat tossed on the waves, and they find themselves plopping into the ocean, and that's how they enter the magical world of Narnia at that time.
Oh.
So, for me, I think that says a lot about pictures and what they can say, and how when you look at them very hard, in a way you fall into them. And so I think the figures in my pictures are in there, and the world they're in makes complete sense to them while they are in it. I think they definitely all have a sense of a mission they have to accomplish in that inner world, and we can watch them from outside the frame. But I think if we look hard enough, perhaps we can tumble in.
Now, there was another thing which sort of struck me, so I'll go back to Gini on the moment as first, that say, you have the images or the message, the carnival, the sort of the same time, the sort of in-between worlds, but then also you have a very, very strong, kind of harsh political and feminist kind of trade in your work, or trend in your work, against Flora does not have in the same way. I mean, because your work sort of maybe is as rebellious, but you do it in a kind of more nebulous way. So like that people don't notice maybe, although the end might be as forceful. So especially so if I look at these four horses of the apocalypse, which is the first kind of thing you see when you come in, which is incredibly striking, very powerful, but also very energizing. I think they have a great energy to call as a call for action, even if they are about destruction. So can you tell us a bit more about what the apocalypse is really serious stuff?
Well, as I said, it was a response to the war in Ukraine. I was really horrified by Russia invading Ukraine, because it's so close to home, and what's going on in Gaza. So it was a response to that. And first of all, I thought, the riders of the apocalypse, and then I thought, I don't need the riders, the horses are just as expressive. So the the skeleton one represents death, which is called a pale horse, and then the red one is called Destroyer of Worlds, and that represents war. And the black one is famine, so I've called that hunger. And the white one is that's conquest, according to the traditional meaning. And I've called it "What is it good for?", which is a line from the Temptations song about war. They're pretty. I've got the scenery under the white horses I took from the scenes of the First World War in a Bond landscape, and the ones under the red horse are pretty self-explanatory, ruined buildings, and there's the crack of doom behind the skeleton horse. So, again, I just I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I just kind of took bits from here and there and put them together. And I'm normally a printmaker, so those are the first really big paintings I've done, and I really enjoyed it. I don't suppose anyone will buy them because they wouldn't really want them on their wall, but they are going to be in an exhibition called Wild Horses in Gallery Green.
But they are connected to, because you do the ceramics, and they are connected to a Welsh...
Mary Lloyd.
Yeah, so...
Which is...
which I did not anything about, maybe a lot of people do. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think nobody knows quite how it originated, but it's been going in villages in South Wales. I think it's spread to various other villages in Wales. People dress up at the turn of the year, New Year, with a horse skeleton, a horse skull and sheets, and they go around to pubs and they have to sort of challenge the people in the pub and say poems before they're let in, and it's a whole ritual, which I must admit I've never seen, I haven't, but it sounds like really a lot of fun. So it's kind of the death of the old year and the birth of the new, really. That's what it represents, I think. So it doesn't directly
but in a way, they also sort of like, although, the story of the apocalypse is different, but of course they all sort of like destroy the old, they destroy the static that was there, what is there, and sort of like, cannot function anymore. And so there is a sort of like slightly similar in sort of like that the old has to go in order for the new to come out. But I was sort of like, because now I'm looking at sort of like Flora's sort of mermaids at the end, which is very, very different. The water element, although some of it is quite more sort of the earth element, but you have also quite a lot of water elements in your work. So Gini does really fire and the sort of like, the kind of combativeness, both in the women there as in the series of the apocalypse. And you sort of like, this kind of like, it is again an other world in us, but you place it in this world because that mermaid is sitting on a bed, probably you might say a human bed, but normal, maybe, in your bedroom kind of thing.
Yes. Fire is more a sort of refining transformation, isn't it? And I think water is, the immersion is perhaps a gentler portal. So I'm intrigued by the form of the mermaid because, of course, she is half and half. So she's half in the water and half out. So it's like that moment of crossing. So the next to the mermaid is a charcoal drawing of a female sensual figure standing on a cattle grid. Yes, she's standing on the cattle grid. For me, that also is a crossing point because if you stand in the cattle grid, it sort of goes up to there and you're buried in the land up to your waist. Also, if you go over it, you're crossing into a kind of wild domain where there are beasts you do not want to escape. And cars have to cross into that realm, and everything is then loose and free. You don't know what's going to come at you. But I was talking about water, wasn't I? So back to the water. Yes, I'm really interested in the idea of how you cross into water and become maybe a different figure, a different type of person, a kind of more fluid being. So I think it's a sort of freeing motif and an entering of a kind of flow state. and maybe a little bit more intuitive. And there's links to divination, I think, with becoming a sort of watery being.
And divination, what do you mean? Sort of like, well, no, divination means sort of,
Yes,
what's the context?
maybe having a kind of truer vision and being able to sink into the nature of things more. I mean, the very nature of immersion is to become part of that.
So they're not oracles, they're not sort of like
No.
doing divination for the human beings.
No, I think it's a sense of, I want to give a sense of looking inwards and sensing what might be out there.
Okay.
A reflective state.
So there is sort of like, I don't really know, I forgot that our timing. Have you anybody looked at the time? Just really, we want to keep it sharp before we can do the questions. Yes, we have nearly sort of gone half an hour, so we can talk a little bit more. There are two sort of like, Mr. paintings, which is, sort of, I think you also are, you're not only a printmaker, well, you're a lithographer and an etcher.
Yes.
I know things about etching, I don't really know much about lithography, sorry Paul, I mean, I know you tried. So, because they're very different media, in so far that, well, etching is has to do with nitric acid, really, and lithography is different kind of thinking, different kind of working. And then Gini, of course, is a photographer and a painter. So you both have, say, a double medium in which you work with a different character. Now, we're not going to do a technical talk, but do you think that the kind of medium you choose for a particular image has the impact on the character or the tale your image wants to tell?